Emily, and Anne. The Bronte sisters were the three sisters belonging to 19th century England, and they are very popular for having written novels. They were actually born in a village called Thornton, but later they came to be associated with Haworth in Yorkshire. The sisters, Charlotte, Emily, and Anne, were born in 1816, 1818, and 1820, and they were known as novelists, although they began initially with a volume of poetry. Like many other contemporary female authors of their time, they began with male pseudonyms, and these pseudonyms were Currer, Ellis, and Acton Bell. Eventually, Charlotte's Jane Eyre became very popular, and then people started taking notice of the other novels which were been written by the other two sisters, and these were Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte and Anne's Agnes Grey. Charlotte was the eldest, and she's very well known for her novel Jane Eyre. And this novel is a coming of age novel, and it is also known as the genre is also known as Bildungsroman. And Emily's Wuthering Heights is also a very popular one. It is a fiery romance set in Yorkshire, and Anne Bronte's Agnes Grey is about the profession of a governess. Patrick Bronte, the girl's father, was an employee of the church, and he had come from Ireland, and he had educated himself, and he had really done very well for himself, and he had lived in the parsonage with his 6 children. And at this time, when they are living in Haworth, the city is a growing industrial town, and many mills are coming up, and the population is slowly increasing, and it is also becoming a kind of a hazard for them to grow up here, because at one point of time this is one of the worst affected towns with respect to public hygiene in England, and many children are die, and in fact one of the records would say that not many children are even able to survive in this time. So the fact that the water supply of the town ran through the graveyard, it contaminated the water, and that led to many casualties. And around this was the time when the mother of these children, Mrs. Bronte, passed away. And when she died, her children were very young. Her eldest daughter Maria was 7 years old, and the youngest daughter Anne was just 2 years old. And eventually, after Mrs. Bronte dies, the elder two daughters die also of calamities that happened to the family. Post the death of his wife, Patrick Bronte becomes very withdrawn, he becomes very strict, and he sends his 4 daughters to the clergy's daughters' school at Owen Bridge. And while Charlotte, Emily were very young at this time when they are sent to school, they were to remember this institution for a lifetime. In fact, Charlotte writes about this particular school even in Jane Eyre. And Charlotte models the school as Lowood and Mr. Brocklehurst from her memories of the school. And the school is, as I was saying, this is infamous for an outbreak of typhus, and clearly due to unsanitary conditions which prevail here, and also because of poor nutrition, children who are studying here and girls who are studying here are actually dying. And unfortunately, it is here that the earlier two sisters, the elder sisters Maria and Elizabeth, catch diseases, and when they come back, they are diagnosed with what we understand today as tuberculosis, and they die. And eventually the father calls all the daughters, the surviving daughters, Charlotte and Emily, home, and it takes a long time for him to have the courage to send these daughters back to school. So they're basically getting education at home, they're studying at home. And the children, the 3 daughters and the brother, they also have a younger brother called Barnwell, who is uh, Branwell, who is also living with them, and they give each other company, they write stories, and entertain for entertainment. They used to write stories in very very small handwriting, as the father did not appreciate this habit of writing, or writing novels or stories. So they would write in very very small handwriting, so small that the father could not read it. And this is one of the pictures of the way they would write. And um, and they would write of far off lands, and this exposure to writing eventually would lead them to write poetry and novels, which were published much later. And it took them several more years to go back to school. And when they did, these girls were trained to become governesses. And 19th century is the time when women do not have as many options to follow in their careers. And Charlotte Bronte actually does fight this out in a way. She writes about this. And while the brother Barnwell moves to London to study art, these girls don't really have an option but to study to become teachers or governesses. And they do become teachers and governesses, and they stay. They try holding on to jobs, but most of it is unsuccessful. This is a painting that Barnwell has made about his sisters. This is Emily, Charlotte, and Anne Bronte. And Charlotte Bronte, we see she's a short, is of short stature, and we also know that Jane Eyre in the novel is also supposed to be really short, although Charlotte Bronte does not categorically say that Jane Eyre is not herself, but we find many similarities of Charlotte and Jane through the way Jane is represented. And this is a picture of Branwell, and it's a self-portrait. He did not succeed in becoming an artist, and in fact, in London, he became an addict of alcohol and opium. And since the brother is not able to set himself up, the girls are left to fend for themselves. Charlotte and Anne tried many teaching jobs, and even they try to start a school of their own, but nothing is successful. Eventually, they decide to go to Brussels in Belgium in order to learn German and French, and hopefully to settle down there. But this also is not successful, and Emily, especially, is unable to settle herself outside her home, and she has to come back. Charlotte, however, falls in love with this married man called Constantin Hager, and she wants to stay for a longer time in Belgium, and she does that. She stays for a longer time in Belgium in 1843, hoping to have a fruitful relationship with Hager, but nothing comes of it. She also writes many letters to him, which can be called as love letters, but nothing really comes of this relationship. And this is the time when railways are being set up in England, and there are more job opportunities, and the brother for a while starts working in the railways. But since, as we know, he's an opium addict, he's an alcohol addict, he's not able to survive there, and he's actually accused of stealing money, and he has to leave this job. Eventually, this person will become a problem for his family, because he would not be able to earn, and he would also be in debt constantly, and it does create a problem for the sisters and his father. The later lives of the Bronte sisters are also riddled with many, many challenges. As none of the efforts to have stable sources of income worked, they are now left with not many options. And it is now that Charlotte Bronte comes up with the idea that they could actually publish the poems that they had written earlier. And they tried that, but even though their poems are published, the volume hardly finds any buyers. And they publish with male pen names, as I was telling you. Currer, Ellis, and Acton Bell are the names they choose. Even though their poetry is more or less goes unnoticed, the girls are encouraged to write novels, and each of them writes a novel each. Emily writes Wuthering Heights, Anne writes Agnes Grey, and Charlotte writes The Professor. Now, Charlotte's Professor is actually based on her experience of staying in Brussels. While Wuthering Heights and Agnes Grey do get published, Charlotte's book actually fails to get any publishers, and it is known that she had actually gone to 9 publishers, and all 9 had rejected this manuscript. Eventually, Charlotte takes her father for an operation, for a cataract operation, to Manchester, and she has to stay with him in dark. He's made to wait in dark. Made to stay in dark for some time, and while she is with him, she stays in dark, and then she writes her novel Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre is quickly accepted by London publishers, and it is an immediate success. And this made the audience think that the other 2 novels by Emily and Anne are also by the same author. People started feeling that these are all the novels written by the same author. But Charlotte wanted to clarify this identity crisis, and that's when the sisters decided to reveal their identities and go to London. Emily does not agree, and Emily does not want to write with her real name. She wanted to keep writing under the pen name of Alice Bell. Anyway, while the girls are away, they reveal their identities, and they eventually do get famous, but this fame is also short lived. Jane Eyre is released in 1847, and the Bronte's brother, Branwell Bronte, dies in 1848, just the next year, and by his death, he is completely addicted to alcohol, and he's a total social recluse. And his death, although tragic, it comes as a relief to the sisters. Shortly afterwards, even Emily died in 1848, presumably by pneumonia, and just another year later, in 1849, Anne dies as well. So all the 3 sisters, the siblings, Branwell, Anne, and Emily, die almost within a year, and that clearly leaves Charlotte the only surviving child of Patrick Bronte. Charlotte publishes her next novel, Villette, in 1853, and she continues to write, and she even gets married to Arthur Bell Nichols. But this marriage is not perhaps appreciated by her father, and the father does not even attend the wedding ceremony. In any case, Charlotte seems to be pretty happy, but the same year, in fact, 1855, she becomes pregnant, and she dies of complications arising from her pregnancy. And the first novel that she had written, The Professor, which had initially failed to get any publishers, that is published posthumously in 1857. Her father and her husband survive, and they live for a few more years. So this is the story of the extremely talented 3 sisters. Let me know in your comments whether you liked the video. If you didn't, I come up with new videos every week. Please do let me know what text you would want to study next. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.